being human takes tools. Like there are certain tools you need to essentially not suck at being human. And when students have those, great. And when students don't, then I just want to get curious about how do we confer those? Like if little AJ shows up and he doesn't know algebra, I don't get angry about that. I do get curious. Okay, got it. So what do we need to do to make sure that little AJ learns algebra? And so similarly, when little AJ shows up and doesn't know about accountability, doesn't know about self-regulation, I get curious about that. And so the book really focuses in on 6 key tools. Absent these tools, it's going to be really hard for them to experience maximization, really hard for them to experience this choice-filled life where they get to experience the fullness of what they're capable of.
Welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Linda Ulrich, and I'm also the founder of a giant global website for good news called the Goodness Exchange. Our guest today is author, speaker, educator, coach for school systems in leadership, AJ Crabill. Now, we've interviewed AJ before because he has some remarkably innovative ideas about education, about leadership, about how we work with kids to make the most of their unique skills and the problems we need to fix in our systems that may not be built for our times. AJ is one of those rare people who can gracefully cause us to pause and rethink our assumptions. That's what I found in our first interview with AJ. He changed me forever. I listened to the news entirely different. It used to be, it's pretty easy to listen to the news when we're talking about education or young people and get pretty down about the future. Well, that's part of the whole negative news thing, but it is also because we aren't meeting kids where they are. We aren't talking about the tools that we need to be giving them to function well in our current society. And AJ has recently written a second book. The first book I interviewed him about was called Great on Their Behalf: Why School Boards Fail, How Yours Can Be Effective. Now, I know not all of us are on the school board, not all of us even care about the school board, but that book was instrumental, as I say, in changing the way I thought about kids and our future and what's possible. And now AJ's written another book called Our Tools They Deserve: Why Adults Choose Retribution and How Students Can Practice Restoration. Now, this is a book that applies to all of us. I've read it. It leveled me up by miles on what I think about the problems that we have now and how I perceive the solutions. So AJ, I can't thank you enough for joining us again. Welcome, AJ Crabill.
Thanks so much, Linda, for having me back. It's good to be here.
Well, I want to start out with something right away that you said to me in our pre-call that just kind of played around in my mind for a while. You said there are a lot of things that school communities do, but only one reason why they exist. So let's go from that statement. Talk to us about what you mean by that.
Yeah, of all the different things that school systems do as institutions, they provide transportation, they buy textbooks, they feed children lunch, they supervise children on playgrounds, they go on field trips. There's so many different things that school systems do. And sometimes the challenge is we can get so caught up in all the different things that the school system is doing that we aren't really dialed into why does the school system exist in the first place? Like, what is the core mission of the school system? Why have we chosen as communities to invest so much money, so many resources into schools? And the argument that my team and I make is that school systems ultimately exist for one reason, and really one reason only. That there's a lot of things that they do, but there's only one reason they exist. And that's important to be clear about why school systems exist, because that becomes the measure of which of all the things we're doing should we continue doing, which things should we do more of, which things should we probably do less of. We look to see, are those things in alignment with why the school system exists? And what we say is that school systems exist to improve student outcomes. They exist to cause improvements in what students know and are able to do, such that children can live lives of meaning, lives of purpose and intention, and be able to take care of themselves, their loved ones, and their communities. And that if children leave a school system without the knowledge and skills necessary to live a choice-filled life, then we haven't fulfilled on why school systems exist. And so we can do all of these other things and have balanced budgets, which are important, and hire people in the county, which is important in so many things. But if we do all those things, and at the end of the day, our children leave without the tools they need to be successful in their next steps in their journey, and then the school system simply has not been effective at the reason for which it exists.
Mm. And we do get so caught up in all the minutia.
It's easy to do, and it's easy to get really deeply invested in the one particular task that I'm in the middle of. I think of in a prior career, I was in technology. So when I transitioned to education, I'd find myself like deeply focused on, well, these computers are too old and we need to upgrade these computers. And if we upgrade these computers just right, then that's going to be the miracle cure for all of education and everything will be perfect and great. And so I'd get super invested and devoted to this one little piece. It's kind of like this huge elephant, and I've got my hand on this one part, and now this one part is the elephant. And the challenge in that is, one, it was clearly not the case that us swapping out these computers was going to fix all this education. But in the moments when what we really need to focus on is over here, and I'm focused in over here, in that moment, unintentionally, I'm causing harm to children by being so deeply fixated on the doings of school system, and not on the reason for which school systems exist. And so this willingness to recalibrate, to take a look again and try to identify what is it that I'm doing right now, and in what ways in alignment with why school systems exist, and are there other things that are more powerful deployments of my attention, more powerful deployments of the resources of the school system to really set students up for a choice-filled future?
You know, almost everything that's in the news about schools and the division and the acrimony and the school boards that are up in arms, almost all of that is focused on these separate issues, as if maybe every school board member or most people that go to a school board meeting, have one issue that they are really passionate about. And then that's how we get down that rabbit hole. It probably starts with good intention, but then it takes us all the way off track about the purpose, right?
Well, my focus on technology certainly started with good intentions. It started, with
Yeah.
like I had the expertise to see that there was a challenge, and so of course I wanted to help ameliorate whatever pain children might be experiencing in that one little area. The problem is my obsessive focus on it ultimately was not about serving children. That was about serving me. That was about my ego, about what I had to contribute, about what expertise I had, irrespective of what children actually needed at that moment. And that's the trap that we can fall into, that I can be so seduced by the one piece of the puzzle that I happen to know about, that it stops being about the big picture. It starts being about my contribution. And that becomes more important. Me contributing becomes more important than whether or not children received the benefit that they deserve.
That's such a great place to start, because that's the big picture. That's what's driving our education system right now, are a lot of people with good intentions and narrow fields of expertise that are very often volunteering and then sometimes in leadership position, but not focusing on that big picture reason for education. I love the way you put it somewhere. You say, what I suspect all people want for our children is maximization, that our children experience the maximal expression of who they are capable of becoming and growing up into. That is
Yeah.
that is the goal, isn't it? Just that we maximize every child's potential.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in this book on this topic of maximization, of really challenging school systems to consider that this is really at the core of our purpose, that what we want for ourselves as a society is bound up in what we make available for our children. And that the greater the likelihood that they can experience the maximal expression of their possibility, the greater likelihood that we as a full society can. And so, this idea of schools as centers of maximization, that really opening opening up the doors of maximization for students, that I get to experience the greatest version of myself. And the schools are cultivators of that. Is a large part of the idea of the book. And the challenges, as an example, yesterday I was visiting with a group of educators. They had asked me to come in and do a training for a group of them. And one of the conversations I led them through was I asked them to get with their shoulder partner and write down what are the 5 tools that students most need to be successful after they leave school. What are the tools that, if they don't have these tools, that they certainly won't be able to lead this agentic life, life of agency, life of choice and purpose. And so, each of them get together in their pairs. They write down these 5. What are the 5 tools that they most need? And then I ask them, okay, rank those from 1 to 5. So not just what are the 5 that are important, put them in rank order. And now with just your top 3, identify which of those that you currently have a curriculum for, a strategy for how do we help students acquire this tool, and which ones do you not have. And so while things like literacy and numeracy are certainly going to be on the top 10 list of pretty much anyone anywhere, so too are things like self-regulation. So too are things like metacognition. Too are things like personal responsibility and accountability. These things make the list consistently when I have this conversation with families and educators across the country. But what's unique about these items is that, unlike literacy and numeracy, more often than not, almost every single time, schools are saying we don't actually have any strategy for teaching these. And so if little AJ shows up at school and doesn't know algebra, we think, okay, well, we've got a strategy for making sure that he leaves knowing algebra, because this is probably going to make a real difference for him. This is a tool that he needs in his toolbox later in life. If little AJ shows up at school and doesn't know self-regulation, that's a necessary tool that he needs to be effective later in life. But we don't have any type of strategy for trying to make sure that he leaves with that capacity. If he doesn't know anything about personal responsibility, we say that's a tool that he needs later on in life, but we don't have any strategy for that. And in that moment, in the moment we say that these are critical tools that they need in their toolbox, but as a school, we don't have any strategy to help them add that tool to their toolbox, that's when I would suggest that we are falling short of our duty of creating the context for maximization for our students.
That is one of those concepts that seems so obvious once I hear you say it, once I read it in your book. This is the bottom line, is that education isn't still, what we needed to know 200 years ago when education was invented, 250, right? By the Prussians. There's that great Sal Khan TED Talk. I'm going to link people to that, where Sal talked from the Khan Academy, where he talks about the history of education, that we haven't changed it very much. I think that is he the guy that says if you just could turn back time and drop somebody from this era into the middle of the classroom 200 years ago, they'd know exactly where they were.
Yeah.
But not so if you drop them in a parking lot or a dentist office or any place else. It's all different, right? But the education, we're doing it the same way we did 200 years ago. I love your thoughts on that. Now, you tell a great little story in the book about Jasmine. Yeah. Could be Josh, Janelle, John, Janine, anybody. But you say, there was, tell us the story of Jasmine. But I love that you say there was nothing wrong with Jasmine. She was not an evil person. She's not mean-spirited. She just didn't have the tools. And she was using the first tool that came to her, which was kind of a violent nature. Talk to us about this concept, because that is a demonstration of this tool concept you're talking about.
Yeah. I tell stories a lot of my former students in the book. All of them, their names are changed to protect their privacy. But yeah, the story of Jasmine that I opened the book with, as her principal reached out to me and asked, hey, could you admit her into your summer program? And at that time, I was the director for a summer program that really worked on student leadership and invited students in. And we're often reached out to by principals and said, look, I got this student and they're just absolute problematic. I don't know what to do with them. Can you take them into your summer program with the expectation of reputation, not completely without merit, that there's a great possibility that you send some of your most challenging students, and at the end of the summer, our endeavor is to send you back your next student body president. Like that's how certain we were that there was greatness inside of the students who were coming to us. And so Jasmine was one such student. And her principal said, please take her. We brought her in. It turned out she had just had a really strong history of fighting basically every year throughout middle school and high school. And had recently been suspended again for fighting, which is what brought her principal to reach out to us. And we did what we do with all the students that we worked with. We just really looked at what are the tools that are not in their toolbox, the presence of which could really be transformative. Because our core belief in this work is that if we see a student hammering a screw into a piece of wood, which for the construction inclined ain't going to work. If we see a student hammering on a screw, our first thought isn't what is wrong with this child? Why are they hateful of screws? And why are they a bad child? And why are they abusing hammers? Our first thought is just to get curious. Like, I wonder if they have a screwdriver, and I wonder if they know how to use a screwdriver. And so when we see students like Jasmine arrive, that's where the curiosity lies. I wonder if she has the tools that she needs for maximization, and if she does, then how does she have fluency with them, and can we help her get more proficient in using those tools? And so, do the tools exist? And if the tools do exist, but don't, then let's get them the tools. And if they do exist, let's get them fluency with the tools. And so that's what we did all summer long. So fast forward, it's the end of the first day of school, and my phone rings. It's the principal. She says, do you have time to talk when you talk about Jasmine? And I'm like immediately on kind of heightened alert. She said, I got my whole administrative team. We got you on speakerphone. So exactly what happened this summer. And it turns out that they had a full Jasmine intervention plan for the first day of school. That if they start to see a crowd of children gather, and it looks like there's going to be some type of violent altercation, and they see Jasmine, like hurry up and get in there, grab Jasmine, prevent her from hurting any children, and try to shut it all down before it gets started. And so, sure enough, it's the first day of school. There's some type of drama. It looks like it's getting started off. There's a crowd of students that starts to gather around it, and they look up and they see Jasmine coming from the opposite end of the area, and she's headed straight for the middle of the drama. It's like, all right, quick, get in there. But the principal says we couldn't get in there in time. Like the crowd of students just got too dense. And by the time we finally pulled students away and we got to the middle, Jasmine was standing between two girls and had them doing breathing exercises, de-escalated thing, and then sent them on their separate ways. And so the principal says, like, what exactly happened this summer? What is going on? And what happened is Jasmine had a hammer. Jasmine, what I discovered to be true about her was all the things that she said. Like, she was a particularly hateful or violent person. She was clearly doing violent things. That's clearly what she was doing. But it doesn't mean that's who she is. It just means that those are the tools that she had. And my big bet, the big bet of my entire team was, if she had different tools, then maybe she'd make different choices about which tools to use in a given moment. And that's fundamentally the coaching that we offer students. And the whole intention behind the book is to stop and just wonder, if I see a student hammering a screw, is the challenge that they're an evil child, or is the challenge that they just don't have access to a screwdriver? And can I make a screwdriver accessible? And that's ultimately the coaching that we provided Jasmine at the end of the summer. Was you now have different tools, and our only request is, whenever circumstances come up at your school, open up your toolbox, identify which tool you believe in your wisdom makes the most sense for the circumstance, and then use that. And the question was, well, what if the best tool is fighting? Then fight. Like, if you, in your judgment, that's the the most appropriate tool for the moment. If you feel like your safety is at risk and you're going to be harmed, and you feel like then fight. Understand there will be repercussions for that choice, but I trust your judgment, and you make the call. But if in your judgment the best tool is one of these other things that we learn, maybe some self-regulation, take a moment to breathe, really reflect on what is this alignment between this actions and my personal goals. And then if that makes more sense, then use that tool instead. And in that context, not devaluing her existing tools, but saying, here's some additional tools, pick the one that you believe makes the most sense for your context. With that coaching alone, Jasmine never fought again, never got suspended again, graduated high school, went to college. And so that's what is at possibility, is that if we recognize it, all of the amazing things that she went on to do was always within her. But it was gated by a lack of tools, the presence of which were transformative.
Mm. And that's kind of the takeaway that I took from our first interview. And I will, I'll just say right now that we're going to have a lot of resources on the Goodness Exchange, the big website, for an article related or built around this podcast episode. So if you get your podcast at Spotify, you won't get as much information. But if you go to the Goodness Exchange and the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast there, you're going to find AJ's last interview around that concept, pretty strictly around that concept. It's mind-blowing to think that, this is way oversimplifying, but, kids join gangs because that seems like the logical choice. I mean, what you made me think about was that kids have a propensity towards self-safety and finding the place where they can guarantee they won't be alone and that they won't,
they're trying to get their needs met.
That's it. And they're smart about that. And if we put kids in a position where the smartest thing to do to get those needs met is with a gang, then they'll do that. But when are we going to turn the light on ourselves and say, wow, did we mess up for little AJ? Right?
Yeah, I certainly joined the argument that when I see students resorting to those type of circumstances, that I get really curious about where did we miss the opportunity to really be a transformative agent and to be a powerful influence in life. Oh, where did we miss it? There was a moment in time where they were looking and they saw us and they saw this gang, and for whatever reason, whatever they saw and how we showed up led them to the conclusion that what the gang was offering was better aligned with their interest. And that makes me curious about us, like who do I need to become such that when students interact with me, that they see greater opportunity for themselves and they see in other outlets that don't have their best interest at heart.
It's so huge, AJ, this moment of self-reflection that we should be taking in our school systems, in our our adult lives and our communities, about how we're failing to give kids the tools. Okay, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about this tools concept, because it is, the way AJ puts it in this book is brilliant. If you have anything to do with the school system, your kids are just growing up and getting through, or that's what you're trying to do is help on school boards and something, you have to read AJ's book. We're going to show that in just a second, but let's take a break. You know how the constant negative noise in our digital lives feels like it's reaching a boiling point? Now, many of us have tuned out the news and social media almost entirely. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. There are newsworthy stories about amazing progress, innovation, leaps in human potential, and wonders in the natural world, and they're just not reaching the top of our feeds. We can have access to this, but none of us has the time, or maybe even the emotional stamina, to search through all the doom and gloom news to find what's right with the world. Okay, enter the Goodness Exchange. There, we are giving instant access to positive news for curious people. Did you hear about the recent Harvard study that found that exposure to just 4 minutes of good news can make you 32% less anxious and 18% more optimistic? Well, I don't know about you, but I need those kind of numbers in my life. So if you want to live with more joy and way less fear, It's really simple. First, you join us at the Goodness Exchange. Everyone around the world has the opportunity to access this kind of content. And we've promised no politics for about a decade, so you're safe from all that distraction as well. Second, you allow this new, more positive, balanced worldview to put a spring in your step again. It can change the way you react to your kids, your coworkers, everybody you come in contact with. And the stories we write about can make you the idea person in your circles. These challenging times call for us to wake up and take control of our perspective. The people who use the Goodness Exchange have the ability to react to the harshness of the world much different because they know way more about what's right with the world. And that's a resource. So subscribe to the Goodness Exchange, our YouTube channel and the podcast, and use this content to live a more expansive worldview. It is still an amazing world out there, and you can be a part of it. Welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness. Okay, we're back with AJ Crabill. He's the author of this beautiful book, and I do mean beautiful because I felt better inside after reading this book, and it brings me to think that every brain of every child is beautiful. It's just that in our hands, what will we do with that beauty? What will we do with that potential? So AJ, our tools, they deserve. This is the book you'll want to pick up. And AJ, I want to get started talking about this concept of tools, because if it's new to folks, you make this great statement. When a kid starts failing at math, we think that's a tool that they need.
Yeah.
We get all up in arms and we call in the Mounties and we get them special training and we do everything. But like you mentioned in the opening, we're not very worried. At least it doesn't seem like we're very worried about the tools that kids will need to carry on a normal, contributive adult life.
Being human takes tools. Like there are certain tools you need to essentially not suck at being human. And when students have those, great. And when students don't, then I just want to get curious about how do we confer those. Like if little AJ shows up and he doesn't know algebra, I don't get angry about that. I do get curious. Okay, got it. So what do we need to do to make sure that little AJ learns algebra? Little Linda walks through the door and she can't read. I don't get angry about that. I just start getting curious about, okay, what do we need to do to really make sure that she leaves here with the tool of literacy? And so similarly, when little AJ shows up and doesn't know about accountability, doesn't know about self-regulation, I get curious about that. And I want to know what can we do to make sure that little Linda walks out of here with those tools in her toolbox. And so the book really focuses in on 6 key tools that I believe there's reasonable cause in the literature around youth development and growth that absent these tools, it's going to be really hard for them to experience maximization, really hard for them to experience this choice-filled life where they get to experience the fullness of what they're capable of, as sapient, sentient individuals. And so the tools that we focus on in the book are responsibility. In addition to responsibility, accountability. These sound similar, but are two actually quite different concepts. Self-regulation, metacognition, active listening, and empathy. With the belief that
before we skip, talk to me about metacognition. I'm not sure I know what that is.
Yeah, so metacognition is this idea of thinking about your thoughts. One of the things that really resonated for me with this idea of metacognition is there was a study done and they were looking at different interventions to address bullying in school. And so they had kind of just say no style anti-bullying interventions, and they had let's have some social workers and let's have psychologists and all these other things. And then they had this one initiative, around metacognition where it had students stop and be thoughtful about what they're thinking and kind of what their process is at the moment. At the end of the study, basically none of these strategies worked. In fact, probably the least effective strategy was the anti-bullying program. Like, well, just say no to bullying, and if you see bullying, then go tell an adult, and blah blah blah. Like all of these strategies that are kind of the things that we would lean into didn't work. And this one kind of unexpected thing actually made a difference, which was this metacognition effort of really pushing students to be thoughtful about their own thinking. And part of that is being clever enough not to believe everything you think. If we can actually stop and like, what is happening in my internal environment, and how is that impacting what how I'm perceiving what's going on in my external environment? Like, this is a key aspect of metacognition, and so it's one of the 6 tools that we focus on.
Yeah, it's so lovely. And then the other thing I noticed through the whole book is that you're not creating. I mean, you are speaking to adults. You are speaking to all of us who have some influence in the young
Mhm.
people in this world, but you're really focused on giving kids tools that they can use in their own world because we can't always be there. You talk about this concept of circles. Talk to us about that.
Well, remember, the intention here is twofold. One, do students have the tools? Have they learned enough about screwdrivers that they know what a screwdriver is, and that there's one in their hands? But then the second is around fluency. How effectively can they deploy it? Do they know how to use a screwdriver effectively? When are the circumstances when a screwdriver would be the most ideal tool, when it wouldn't be, and then how to use it? And so do we have the tool in our toolbox?
And
And do we know
you're obviously talking about the screwdriver as a metaphor for de-escalating or
Yeah, so for
all
self-regulation,
the things that we adults
for
have learned to get ourselves out of a tight jam
yeah, well,
in a
and
social
being
situation.
responsible and being
Right.
accountable, and demonstrating empathy. These are all tools. And the question is, one, do I have the tool? Do I actually know what this thing is? And second is, do I have fluency with the tool? Am I really proficient at its use in the moments when this is the most effective tool for the job? And so it's not actually enough that children know that these tools exist. The fluency aspect is important. And so, for example, it's not enough for children to know that letters exist. Actually, being fluent with how to use letters is kind of important as well. And so, you need to know about the tool, but you also need to know how to use the tool. And so, part of what we propose in the book is this idea of designing systems in schools such that students are constantly getting practice using these tools. Again, metacognition, self-regulation, accountability, responsibility, active listening, and empathy. What we really want is for them to practice, 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 because that's a pathway to fluency. Like, if we want children to get good at reading CAT and arriving at cat, the first couple times they do it, it's going to sound like cat, cat. But with practice, 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 they reach a point of fluency. They just say, oh, that's cat. And so we want that same level of fluency, not only with literacy as a tool, but with these other tools that we describe in the book. To get there, there has to be opportunities to practice. And the practice mode that we recommend in the book are community circles, mediation circles, and restorative circles. Essentially, identifying moments in the week of a school where belonging would be a really powerful thing for students to experience. And so having students lead community circles, where connection would be a really powerful thing for students to experience. So having students lead mediation circles, where reparation would be a powerful thing to experience, where students actually having to be accountable for their actions and doing the work to repair the harm that their actions created. And so where a restorative circle would be an ideal vehicle for that.
It's lovely. So you've mentioned a few times so far these concepts that we all know we probably practice unconsciously, but I'm not sure all of us are good at them. And certainly in institutions, our lack of savvy with things like collaboration and all that you're mentioning, doesn't this all require that the adults are super good at all these tools too?
So this is actually one area where I think I differ from a lot of the work that I'm seeing in schools right now, in that a lot of the time when we think about the tools that students need in school, the most appropriate people to confer those tools are the adults. I mean, if children are not literate and we want them to be literate, it makes sense that we have adults there who are trained in teaching reading. If students are not numerate and we want them to be numerate, teachers who are trained in teaching mathematics. And so, in much of what's happening in schools, that that actually makes the most sense, is that adults are uh, best positioned to help students practice learning those tools. But in the case of fluency, once students have learned something, then the act of practicing doesn't always require adults to lead all of that. That students can often lead their own practice with guidance. And so when it comes to doing the work to practice to a point of fluency, to reach a place of automaticity with these tools, we actually think that that's something that students can do largely on their own. They can never be without supervision. That would not be appropriate, but they can actually lead this work while adults are in the room, but not actively the ones leading the work. And so that's what we would call for, is for student led work in this area, with the belief that when students are the one leading the effort, that they're the ones gaining the most learning, that they are developing the most fluency with it. And so if you go back to the story of Jasmine, what happened after that phone call with the principal is she went on to found the student mediation club at her school, and then brought me in, and she and I co-trained students in her school to be peer mediators. And then when situations jumped off in her school, instead of it going to the assistant principal or something of that nature, it would often go to Jasmine and students on her peer mediation team, and they would lead a mediation circle to really help students find a place of connection, come up with a solution to their own challenges, and then get back to class. And so, ever drama might have normally taken the teacher's time and attention away from the curriculum that she was teaching in the moment. Instead, that was outsourced to Jasmine and her team, so that instruction kept going for the rest of the students, so that class is not disturbed, and that the adults can focus on the coursework that we really need them to focus on, but that larger challenge, whatever that conflict was, can still be addressed in an appropriate way, so that it can be de-escalated and students can learn from the experience and then get inserted back into class. And so that's what it means for us to really have a student-led approach to this rather than an adult-led approach.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay. So how I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, how I think we've been addressing, behaviors that are outside the scope of what's going to be productive in schools. How I think we've been addressing those is just simply by retribution. And of course, you mentioned that in the very title, right? Why adults choose retribution and how students can practice restoration. So talk to us about how we got in this retribution phase of education, because I imagine we've been there for 200 years.
Well,
And
a large part of this is efficiency. Take the example I just shared. If I'm trying to teach a class, I've got 35 students in my class. I'm trying to teach a math lesson, and little AJ and little Linda, start behaving in a problematic way in the corner. The more of my time as a teacher that I have to stop and spend with those two, the less instruction for the other 33 students in the class. And so this is a challenge, in that what I'd really want to do is, as educators, I'd want to sit down with little AJ and little Linda, and I want to have a conversation about kind of what's going on for you all, and kind of what is the solution that you two can find, and what's an agreement that you're willing to enter into, and hold each other accountable to, and take responsibility for. That's what I'd want to do. But as a teacher, I don't do that, only because, again, I've got 33 other kids, and I've really got to get through this math lesson, because these kids also need the tool of math. Like, it's a non-negotiable that they get this tool as well. They need these other tools, but it's absolutely can't be at the expense of this. And so what happens, instead of spending that time to really work with my two students to sort through their conflict, I use whatever shortcut, what is the shortest path to getting back to instruction. And often that means, well, let's just kick them out of class, or maybe even kick them out of school. And then I immediately get back to my other 33 students. All I'm suggesting is that it's possible to have both of these. It's possible for me as a teacher to be able to get back to my 33 students and let a group of students who've been trained do the work that needs to be done with these two students who are in conflict. But let that happen in a way that it doesn't prevent instruction from happening for the rest of our students.
that's a great way to explain it. It's just a shortcut because the poor teacher is trying to weigh where they can best use their time, because that is the limiting factor.
That's the challenge. And the one thing that I've noticed about every school that I've visited across the country is that they all have this one thing in common. There are more students than there are adults. Like the students are everywhere. I don't understand this whole schooling thing. It's just full of kids. It's kind of ridiculous. But as long as that's going to be the model, then there's never going to be an opportunity for the adults to take the time necessary to meet this particular set of tool development needs. But then why not tap into the wisdom and the capacity and the ability that our students have, since there's going to be so many of them in the building to begin with.
It's so good. And you have this, I think it's like an investment for school systems, and because they're going to save time in the end. You have this great little part about behavior is best addressed through punishment. That's the norm. That the bad behavior is best addressed through punishment. But you're saying, no, if you can get kids to address behavior when it's at a kind of a low key level, let's say a child yells and it doesn't get addressed at that level, then that yell is going to become a push, and that push is going to become a punch, and so forth. And then you're dealing with stuff way up at the top of the chain where it's so much more complicated. Talk to us about how this methodology, or this way of thinking about educating children, is an investment in the beginning, but then you're saving yourself so much time and energy at the opposite end.
Yeah, what we often like to say is that behavior is communication. Is that when whatever the behavior is that we're experiencing in the moment, it's students' way, sometimes just really ineffectively or inarticulately, but trying to communicate what is a particular need that I'm experiencing in the moment. And part of the role of schools is to be really good at interpreting what is the communication that we're receiving, and trying to listen to that communication when it is causing the least harm to the student or anyone else. And if we don't hear it when it's not harmful, then the volume on the behavior might escalate. And if we don't hear it when it's only mildly harmful, then the volume on that behavior might escalate to the point where we can't help but hear it. But at that point of listening, we generally resort to a fairly retributive set of tools for dealing with it. But what I'm suggesting is that had we heard it sooner, before it reached a point of violence in its communication, while it was still nonviolent in its communication, that really enables us to work with that student to be in a tool development mode rather than in a school protection mode. That if we let it get, if a student walks into one of my buildings with a gun, I'm going to retributive tools. I'm not looking for a restorative moment right then. I'm immediately wanting to separate that student from my building, because now I've got to protect the remainder of my students. So one of the things I try to point out is that I'm not actually against retributive approaches to addressing behavior. There are certain behaviors where a retributive approach, an immediate separation of that student from the school body, is absolutely the most appropriate. And I've definitely deployed retributive methodologies in my various roles in public education. What I am suggesting, however, is that if we can deploy restorative methodologies earlier, if we can actually train students to deploy restorative methodologies earlier, we can avoid getting to these really high violence type of scenarios where a retributive approach often becomes the more appropriate approach.
Yes. So that gets us to like some misconceptions that we are all operating with. There's this misconception, I think most of us think, that students will want to violate agreements, will want to violate rules. We all just think that's what they do. But I don't think you think that's true.
This is a common conversation. I think to be honest, I think it's just a really convenient ruse that we often indulge in. Like as I think back to my own childhood, and as I talk with adults about this around the country and invite them to reflect back on their own childhood, it's really easy to see how a lot of the times when I got in trouble for behavior that was just poor and inappropriate behavior, it wasn't because I was seeking out how can I violate this rule today and how can I anger the adults in my life today. It was usually I was trying to sort through something and I just did it in a really dumb way. And in the moment, it seemed wise and made sense, in the mind of an 11-year-old. But upon reflection, with the eyes of a no longer 11-year-old, it's like this was a dumb adaptation. But it was me trying to be adaptive. It was maladaptive, but it was me trying to be adaptive. And so this is the insight that this section of the book points to, is that what we're really experiencing is maladaptive behavior. Kids just aren't good at these particular type of decisions yet, but that's why we're in a school. Like, we shouldn't be surprised kids aren't good at reading yet. And so our response is, well, let's kick them out. Send them home for 10 days and see if they figure out how to read. Kids aren't good at math yet. Well, let's kick them out and send them home for 10 days and see if they figure out how to read. Kids aren't good at decisions around tense social settings. Well, let's, kick them out, send them home for 10 days and see if they figure out how to be good at navigating tense social situations. Like, it doesn't make sense. What we're experiencing more often than not is kids just aren't yet good at navigating, the day-to-day realities of being human in a complex society. And when we experience that, often what we do instead is we label and say, well, this is just a defiant child and they just want to break the rules. It defies my experience. And again, much of my experience has intentionally been interacting with the little AJs and the Jasmines of the world, students who have a strong history of making choices that are frankly unacceptable choices in a school context, but then helping them identify the tools they were missing, gain fluency with those, and then watching them make radically different choices. That indicates that the underlying condition wasn't a desire to violate the rules. The underlying condition was a lack of the appropriate tools.
Mm. And you have why don't you tell us just a teeny bit of your story, because you aren't coming at this from a purely academic hypothesis. You have lived a life that was a challenge to be a child.
Well, I certainly, in the opening of the book, I offered a dedication. Especially this book is really dedicated both to students who have experienced being thrown away by the adults in their school systems, but also dedicated to the students who are still in these school systems, and may be able to use what's in this book to really secure for themselves the promise of maximization. Fundamentally, that dedication is also written to a younger version of me, who experienced both sides of that equation, and hopeful that children who are coming up, through foster care, group homes, or whatever circumstances, who are experiencing homelessness, experiencing incarceration, or whatever circumstances are vexing children, that this can be a way of thinking about how do we best serve those students. And so it's certainly grounded in what are the things that I wish that I had a greater access to, what are the things that I wish I experienced, but also grounded in the moments when public education was this real powerful source of support for me, that these were the things that were present in those moments, and that when public education failed me, these were the things that were absent in those moments.
Right. I love it. And that is the through line through both AJ's books. Great reads, both of them. As I say, even if you're not anywhere near a school system or caring with passions about those things, your own life experiences, your lived experience is a through line through this. You're talking about little AJ and little Linda and little Jasmine. I mean, you're not just whistling Dixie and giving us a hypothesis. You know those moments when the system failed you, and those moments that got you where you are right now. Do you have a moment, do you think, that relates to what you're teaching people these days, that is responsible for maybe you could have turned right, but you turned left, and here you are?
Wow, there are so many of them. I actually open up my first book with a story of two teachers who actually played that exact role, and point out that that in the minds of most of my other teachers, they had decided that I was this horrible student. In the minds of these two teachers, they said, this young person has potential in them, and we will pour into the potential that they embody rather than the problematic behavior that they embody, and pull them away from that and into this. And so that's certainly, I am survived to this point in my journey by public school teachers who stood in the gap for me in that way on so many occasions. I think of one of my teachers early, I think it was third grade, who had the responsibility of teaching me how to do math. And I wasn't good at it yet. And in spite of not being good at it, I really acted out quite a bit. But she was very, very, very insistent, and pushed and pushed. And even though I know looking back now that I must have been just a little terror in her classroom, I have this distinct memory of her never giving up. Of like, there was never, I don't remember ever being, suspended. I definitely remember being in trouble in her class regularly, and her disciplining me regularly. But I also remember her never giving up on me, and that sense that there is potential in this young person. Like, if Mrs. Jordan, if you're out there somewhere, like, thank you for not giving up. Thank you for continuing to pour into me, even when I'm certain you wanted to just strangle me because of how messy of a kid I was. But it was that willingness to look at what is at opportunity for me, not just the behavior I was exhibiting. Like, if she had taken a different approach, I would have leaned fully into that instead of leaning into what she had to teach me. And by the end of the school year, like, I was all in. Like, if Mrs. Jordan said, go left, I go left. If she said, go right, go right. But because she had invested in me and pushed me in ways that I resisted at the beginning of the beginning of that year, and her insistence, her persistence, is part of why I get to have the story I have today. The only modification I would make to that is, I mostly work with high school and middle school students, is that now, with the benefit of hindsight, I get curious about how much time did she have to take away from instruction to meet me where I was at? And are there ways that we could provide her support so that she doesn't have to take as much time away that could potentially be harmful to other students in class, to be missing out on instruction time that she's spending on me? Are there ways that we could have students, our high school students, being part of that solution so she doesn't have to be the solution alone?
We do put a lot on our teachers. I just don't think people
Yeah.
realize.
Well,
Okay,
I'm,
but
I'm,
that,
I'm
go
actually
ahead.
very uncomfortable with that. Is that I want
Yeah.
our teachers to be able to teach, and asking them to be teachers and therapists and psychologists and parents and social work. Like, this is not
Yes.
respectful to them, and
No.
it doesn't set them or children up for success. Like, there has to
Yes.
be additional resources made available, and my argument is that students can be part of that solution.
Well, that brings me to this. If you're kind of a crabby Appleton person listening to this, I can't imagine that someone would be who listens to Conspiracy Goodness podcast. But if you're pretty set in your thinking about, you know, well, gosh darn it, we got to protect the kids who want to learn from those who don't. I'm sure you hear that sentence all the time. Like, so
Yeah.
talk to us about how you come back to that.
I have yet to come across a student who didn't want to learn. Again, I think that entire idea, that entire notion, is born out of convenience for adults, not out of promise for children. I have yet to ever come across a student who didn't want to learn. I have come across students who did not want to learn from us, students who felt like adults were not trustworthy, were not operating in their best interest, and so would prefer to learn from anybody other than us. And we've all experienced this to some degree. We've all, at some point in our education career, we saw a student who behaved horribly, absolutely deplorably in this class, and was a complete angel over here in this class. And what it tells us is that what's lacking isn't a desire to learn. What's lacking is that they just didn't have trust or relationship or somehow connection with this teacher that they did have with this teacher. And so they behaved horribly over here. They behaved just amazingly over here. But that lives in the sense of connection they had with that teacher. And so what that tells us is this idea that at that child's core, they just don't want to learn doesn't actually hold water. Is that they may be making choices that are, frankly, unacceptable choices in a school context to misbehave over here and not learn from this teacher. But our conclusion shouldn't be that that's because they just don't want to learn, period. Our conclusion should be their behavior over here is inappropriate while their behavior over here is appropriate. And we've got to get to underneath of why is the behavior inappropriate over here. And there has to be a consequence. One of the things that I think people often miss with this work is they think that the path forward to supporting children is to remove consequences. And I think all of the critical research on this completely would disagree with that you cannot have a consequence-free environment that is effective at raising children to be psychologically healthy and effective participants in society. The consequences are absolutely a critical nature of healthy human development. And that as you remove consequences from children, you actually do really irreparable harm to them. And so when children behave in a way that's inappropriate, there has to be a consequence. That's not in question. Now the only question is, what is the nature of the consequence? And what is the intention behind it? If the intention is to be curious about what tools are missing and how do we get access to those tools, then that is a consequence that can actually propel students on the path to maximization. If the consequence is simply, you aren't good at being human yet, so we're going to send you home for 10 days, my only challenge is I don't know that actually helps a student get better at being human.
So many times now through this interview, AJ, you've mentioned the word curiosity. And I tell you, the innovators we've interviewed and written about, thousands, it's like the number one thing that no matter what the topic is, somewhere along the way, they talk to us about getting curious. Like when something isn't working, you don't just keep doubling down on that old way of thinking or that old way of behaving. Like this getting curious. I love your concept about that behavior is communication. It's communicating something. And can we just get curious about that and solve some of these problems or get new systems in that support kids better?
Yeah, and I think this idea of curiosity is absolutely central and pivotal to this work. Is really easy in some contexts and really hard in others. When someone is yelling at you and saying horrible things to you, that's usually when it's harder to be curious about what I wonder what their internal environment is like right now. And so there are moments, if student behavior is absolutely inappropriate, it can legitimately hard to be curious in that moment about what's happening in their internal environment, what tools might they be missing, the presence of which would really be transformative. And so I completely concur that curiosity is a necessary component of this, for us as adults, as we're trying to think about how do we best create the space for maximization for our students. But I also want to fully acknowledge that it is really easy to be curious in some contexts and really hard to be curious in others. And then, frankly, there are moments when curiosity is not the appropriate moment, like when there is imminent harm and threat to children. Like in that moment, the thing to do isn't to be curious. The thing to do is to protect children and prevent the harm. But once we're outside of imminent and immediate harm that has to be directly interrupted, then we must immediately pivot back to curiosity about, okay, so what are the tools missing that actually led us to this place to begin with? Because what we really want to do is we want to prevent that from ever happening again. We don't want to have to suspend children. We want to get to a point where children aren't making choices that cause suspension to feel like the safest choice. And so I definitely pro curiosity, but I do want to acknowledge, for anyone who's ever spent any time in a school will tell you that there are moments when curiosity is just really, really, really hard to bring that generosity of spirit that curiosity requires.
Yeah, and that generosity of spirit may be what kids are picking up on. When you mentioned the same kid can be a nightmare in one classroom and a gem in the other. I think that, we don't give kids enough credit for responding to their environment. Like they know what our intentions are, and it's hard to trick them or to fake them out. Like, I think
And
you're
students are
talking to,
really good readers of people, no doubt.
absolutely, absolutely. So this is something I'm sure that has to come from the heart, and that is probably already in the heart of most teachers, or they wouldn't have gone into the profession in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, teaching is a profession of love. Like if you
Yes.
don't love children, you're not going to last long in education. Certainly not going to last long in schools. This is what brings people to the profession. There are certainly easier ways to pay your rent than teaching, and so this is ultimately a profession of love. And our educators need to receive the respect and the support that an institution of love owes its participants. And I think this is one way we get there.
That's the reason why I wanted to talk to you again, because I've had patients, I have countless patients who are teachers, and they always bring love and light into a room. Very seldom do you meet somebody who's like my third grade teacher, Mrs. Stuckle. But the the most teachers have this incredible inner light that they're dying to shine,
Yeah.
and I think that that's why I wanted to feature your work one more time on the Goodness Exchange, and we'll continue to do it over the years. Okay, last two questions. One is, if this interview had only been 3 minutes long, and you will probably have those opportunities in the media to talk about this book, you get 3 minutes, AJ. What do you really wish people knew?
What I wish people knew is that every single member of our society has the capacity for something great, and that there is what we prepare them for. And anytime it's short of the greatness that's within them, then we've not helped them maximize their potential. And in so doing, we've shortchanged all of us in the doing. That as each individual in our society experiences maximization, all of us grow in what's possible from that. And as we deprive members of our society of the opportunity to experience maximization, all of us are a little poorer for it.
That's a great way to say it. Okay. So what has to happen next? What can we do? What can the listeners, do we pass this interview on? I know I'm going to encourage people to do that, whether you're in or out of a school system, or tangentially or deeply embedded in it. I'm going to request that you pass this on, because AJ has the kind of insights that can really light a school on fire, and bring out, as he said so many times so far, the very best in students, which is the reason for schools. But what else? What else needs to happen next? What can help you get this message out and help you expand your work so that all kids have access to it?
Well, actually, you picked up on an insight that really is, for most folks, going to be the first step in the journey. And that's actually where you started this conversation, which is, why do school systems exist? I think often we do have this idea of school systems exist to help kids get into college or help kids get a job or things like that. And I would just push back against that. That my argument is that school systems exist to improve student outcomes in the direction of maximization, not in the direction of what I want the student to do, but in the direction of what they see for themselves. But that is a different vision for why school systems exist than the common vision for why school systems exist. And so if I were to invite people on the journey, for most people, that's actually where I would have them start, is to just engage in a conversation with people in their community, other parents, teachers, educators, maybe even school board members. Like, why do we say school systems exist? And then have them do the same activity I had the educators do yesterday. Have them write down, okay, so if the reason school systems exist is maximization, then what are the top 10 tools that students need to pursue that? And certainly literacy, numeracy, other things are going to be on that list, as they deserve to be. But there are going to be additional things on there as well. Maybe personal responsibility, maybe self-regulation are on that list. And then ask ourselves, okay, so if this is why school systems exist, and in order to cause that, these are the tools they need, and we don't currently have a plan for ensuring that students are growing in their access to or fluency with these tools, what are we going to do about that? That's the conversation I think anybody can have anywhere, whether it's with parents, whether it's with your kid's teacher, whether it's with the principal, whether it's with the superintendent, whether it's with the school board. And having that conversation, first getting clear about why do we say school systems exist, and then getting clear about what are the tools students need to fulfill on that why. And of those tools, which ones do we currently not have a strategy for making sure students develop? And then seeing where the conversation goes from there.
Lovely. That is basic. So how can people get a hold of you, AJ?
Reach out anytime. I'd encourage. We've got a lot of free resources on the website. The intention is just to get this work out as far and wide wherever people feel like it'd be valuable. You can go to studentledrp.org, and you can email us from the website. But again, most of the resources, all the things that are in the book, are freely available on the website, and so folks can just go there. Whatever you could use, please do. If you got questions about implementation. There's a full implementation guide on there. The book itself is a full implementation guide, but there's additional detailed guides on the website. Please use it. And if it's something that can help you all contribute to the maximization of the students in your community, that's all we really want.
Lovely. And what's that email address one more time, AJ?
They can email me at aj@studentledrp.org, or they can just go to the website studentledrp.org to download any of the free information.
Great, great, great. Well, thank you so, so much, AJ. As I said, I'm going to make sure that in the article on the Goodness Exchange, the other episode is there too, because this is a really part one and part two for me in my mindset. And I can't thank you enough for changing the world and doing what you are uniquely built to contribute. So thank you so much.
Well, and likewise, thank you for just creating a platform for amazing things that folks are doing and trying to pour into the world to be heard. So often it's just a matter of getting the message out, and you're making that happen in a way that I couldn't otherwise. So thank you.
Yes, yes, and I wanna encourage people to do what they can to pass this message on. You never know when an idea or a concept like yours lands on the right ears, what happens next. I could go on and on about the stories of our guests when their interview landed on the right ears, what happened next. So please engage with AJ and help him to get the word out about this new way of thinking about the possibilities for education. I hope that all that he and I talked about help you through your week, put a spring in your step, and we'll be back next week with the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast.